world's most divisive public figures. It began as a calm, introspective conversation about truth, but within minutes, it turned into a...
What happens about Britain's most thoughtful accuser meets one of the world's best alienated accessible figures. It began as a calm, introspective conversation about truth. But within minutes, it affronted into a psychological duel. By the end, like James O'Brien, the man accepted for his backbone and empathy had accomplished his breaking point. The flat lights at Abounding Disclosure cast a balmy amber afterglow over the minimalist set. There was no live audience, no applause, no architecture artist rushing beyond the frame. Aloof 2 chairs, 2 microphones, and the soundproof calm of a London recording studio. James O'Brien leaned advanced in his seat, his accent calm, his eyes focused, but kind. Beyond from him sat Meghan Markle, altogether assertive in a cream blouse and fleet blazer, her posture upright, her expression unreadable. The faintest adumbration of a polite smile lingered on her lips, though her eyes seemed to add measurement every word afore it was alike spoken. "Meghan," James began, his articulation even. "You've spoken so generally about authenticity, about absent to animate activity on your own terms. That's the aspect of this show, really. So acquaint me, what does authenticity beggarly to you now?" Meghan inhaled softly, her articulation bland but cool. "Actuality agency truth, James," she said. "Article that's been missing from how bodies accept alleged to perceive me. It agency abnegation to let others define who you are. Like a back they insist on confounding you." James nodded. "And do you anticipate you've been misunderstood?" She let out an aerial laugh, the kind that agitated added affliction than humor. "I anticipate the catechism isn't whether I've been misunderstood," she replied, tilting her arch slightly, "but whether people anytime capital to accept me at all." There was a connected pause. James, experienced in the rhythms of difficult conversations, accustomed the tone immediately. Defensive, rehearsed, but edged with blood-soaked pride. He smiled faintly. "That's an absorbing way of putting it. But do you anticipate maybe that constant charge to actual people, to clarify who you are, ability be keeping the chat about you rather than about the causes you support?" Meghan blinked, her jaw abbreviating just slightly. "I'm sorry. Is there a rule against speaking for oneself now? Should I be quiet to accomplish anybody abroad feel comfortable?" James chuckles softly, raising his hands. "Not at all. It's just a question. Some bodies see your advocacy as powerful. Others see it as personal cost management." Her expression cooled instantly. "That's such an acceptable label, isn't it? Aback a woman speaks about her experience. It's called branding. Aback a man does it. It's alleged bravery." James nodded boring but didn't back down. "Maybe. Or maybe it's aloof about tone and repetition. The adventure has been told abounding times. Interviews, documentaries, podcasts. Some would say you're still fighting. Battles from years ago." Meghan's smile returned. "But this one didn't ability her eyes. You mean the battles the columnist won't let go of or the ones bodies like you can't stop bringing up?" The air in the room thickened. James kept his accent level, almost soothing. "Fair point, but this isn't the press. This is aloof for conversation." "A conversation?" she repeated, her articulation tightening. "That's an absorbing chat for it because so far it feels like a cross-examination." He leaned back slightly, clasping his hands together. "I assure you, Meghan, that's not the intent. I ask questions. It's what I do." "Yes," she replied sharply. "And you accomplish judgments. That's what you do, too." For an abrupt moment, silence abounding the studio. The affectionate of silence that feels added than words. The ambassador above the bottle confused in her chair. Meghan adapted her blazer, crossed her legs again, and smiled with studied calm. James absently to shift direction. "Let's allocution about America. You've generally declared it as a fresh start. What's altered about activity there for you and Harry?" Meghan exhaled, relaxing slightly. "Everything. There's freedom, creativity, an account for individuality. Bodies don't attending at you and see a title. They see an animal being. I can assuredly be myself without judgment." James hesitated. That's interesting because Abounding would say that American media has been aloof as relentless. Maybe a like added so. Meghan raised her chin. At Atomic in America, I can ascendancy the narrative. I adjudge when I speak. That's what abandon looks like. James nodded, his accent thoughtful. But doesn't that belie the abstraction of stepping abroad from the spotlight? Meghan's smile froze. Contradict? No, it clarifies it. There's a difference between gluttonous aloofness and reclaiming control. Perhaps the media should learn that -4 criticizing me for breathing. James' eyes softened, but his mind was already racing. He'd interviewed politicians, celebrities, even war veterans. And he knew this rhythm, the able confidence, the wounded pride, the attenuate condescension. The allowance was calm. But beneath the calm, something electric was building. He sipped his tea and leaned advanced again, the corners of his aperture appropriation just slightly. Meghan, he said quietly, I'm just aggravating to accept whether you want to be heard or adored. Her eyes flicked up instantly. I anticipate that question says added about you than it does about me, she said coldly. The producer abaft the bottle froze, and for the aboriginal time in the interview, James O'Brien acquainted the temperature in the room drop. The air in the Abounding Disclosure studio acquainted added now, not tense enough to break, but blubbery with the weight of two articulate minds ambit each other like fences in apathetic motion. James O'Brien confused hardly in his chair, his accent still calm, but his eyes had sharpened. You mentioned control, he said, his articulation low, deliberate. That you assuredly accept ascendancy over your story. But a back edition constantly insists they are misunderstood. At what point does ascendancy become obsession? Meghan's eyebrows aerial aloof a fraction. Obsession, she repeated, smiling thinly. That's a rather loaded word, don't you think? James gave a small shrug. Perhaps, but I ask because you've had the adventitious to acquaint your adventure on television, in books, in podcasts again and again. If bodies still don't understand, maybe it's not them who are refusing to listen. Meghan leaned back, her smile never faltering. You mean maybe it's me? I mean, James replied evenly, that maybe the bulletin is being buried beneath the performance. That did it. A beam of affliction beyond her face, gone about as bound as it appeared. Performance, she said sharply. James, with respect, that's a very cynical way to appearance edition sharing their truth. If a man gets affecting on air, he's accepted for his honesty. When I do it, it's a performance. Do you see the bifold accepted here? I see an interesting pattern, he said softly. When you're challenged, you don't answer. You reframe. You about-face every question into a moral statement. You call it arresting yourself, but it often feels like deflecting. Her smile vanished. You complete like the British tabloids, she snapped. Do you assignment for them, too? Or is this aloof your hobby? There was an abbreviate silence. A fresh James chuckled quietly. You know, I actually admire that line. But no, Meghan, my job isn't to attack. It's to understand. And to understand, I accept to ask what others want. Maybe, she said, bridge her arms. You should ask yourself why they want. James' accent charcoal steady, almost clinical. Because they are afraid of actuality alleged article they are not. Sexist, racist, misogynistic. The moment edition challenges you, the labels appear out. That's power, Meghan. And I wonder, do you anytime feel tempted to use it? Meghan stared at him, her expression icy now. What you're implying is insulting. I'm not implying, James said calmly. I'm asking. She gave a quiet, humorless laugh. You're actual good at camouflage criticism as curiosity. Maybe, he said with a side smile. You're actual acceptable at camouflage acrimony as grace. That landed. Meghan blinked, momentarily, stunned. The ascendancy she had so anxiously maintained flickered. For aloof a second, her jaw tightened, her animation shallow. But then, aloof as quickly, she recovered. I'm not angry, she said coldly. I'm aloof tired. Tired of men who anticipate they can psychoanalyze me mid-inter to accomplish themselves look clever. James aged his head unbothered. That's fair. But maybe this isn't about men at all. Maybe it's about accountability. Do you anytime feel that? Meghan? Accountability? Or does actuality blurred absolve you from it? Her accent rose slightly. I've spent years actuality answerable to the world, to her ancestors that capital me silent, to a columnist that capital me broken. Forgive me if I don't feel the need to prove myself to yet edition man with a microphone. James' expression softened, but his articulation didn't. It's not about proving yourself. It's about being consistent. You say you capital peace, but you've alleged platforms. You say you wanted privacy, but you've given interviews. You say you don't appetite pity, but aggregate you say demands sympathy. Isn't that a bucking worth exploring? Meghan's articulation dropped. Quieter now, but sharper. You really think it's that simple? That activity can be boiled bottomward to the complete bites you repeat on this show. Not at all, James said evenly. But contradictions reveal character, and that's what this appearance is about. For a moment, the silence returned, best this time. Meghan's hands bankrupt in her lap. She was still, but her eyes were animate with tension. The control, the poise, the careful restraint. All of it was starting to show its cracks. She assuredly spoke, her words acid and deliberate. I came here celebration. This would be a real conversation, one based on affinity and understanding. But this feels like yet another man aggravating to prove a woman wrong for adventuresome to accept a voice. James leaned back, buzzed softly. You're mistaking claiming for disrespect. Am I? Yes, he said gently. Because this isn't about silencing you, Meghan. It's about seeing whether you accept your own narrative. Meghan let out a short, disbelieving laugh. My own narrative. I'm a narrative, James. Whether I speak or break silent, bodies aberration my life into whatever adventure fits their bias. I'm not the writer. I'm the ink everyone else spills. James admired her quietly for a moment, the affinity aback in his expression, but brave now with something afterpiece to concern. And yet, he said softly, you still accept to hold the pen. That band afraid in the air. Meghan didn't acknowledge immediately. She blinked twice, afresh smiled. A smile that was all surface. No warmth. You really think that's profound, don't you? She said finally. But it's aloof, another attempt to box me in like anybody else does. James smiled faintly. Then maybe the box isn't the problem, Meghan. Maybe it's what happens a back edition finally holds up a mirror, her jaw clenched. You're not a mirror, James. You're a microphone, and you application it like a weapon. And aloof like that, the friendly atmosphere was gone. The temperature in the allowance had dropped again, not because of anger, but because something added had taken hold. It wasn't a chat anymore. It was a duel for about 40 minutes. The conversation amid Meghan Markle and James O'Brien had danced between civility and combat. Each time James tried to alter the altercation toward empathy, Meghan began a way to about face it into an accusation. And admitting James was an adept of restraint, the cracks were showing in his voice, attenuate but unmistakable. He leaned forward, his elbows comatose agilely on the table. Let's allocution about the absolution for a moment, he said evenly. You've spoken about the affecting assessment it took, the sense of isolation, the abridgment of control. Do you anytime reflect on how those statements' ability accept afflicted the institution itself, your family? Meghan tilted her arch slightly, her tone dripping with apish sweetness. Oh, you mean their feelings. It's fascinating how the bodies who silenced me suddenly became the victims in everyone's narrative. James gave her an accommodating smile. But you understand, don't you, that people still affliction about the monarchy, not necessarily as an academy of power, but as allotment of their identity. Some feel your interviews affronted private wounds into accessible weapons. Meghan's jaw tensed. Weapons? She echoed sharply. I was arresting myself. But of course, that's not article bodies like you can understand. Is it? The advantage of never defective to avert yourself. James didn't flinch. I avert ideas, Meghan, every day. That's my job. But defending yourself doesn't consistently beggarly fire the bridge abaft you. She leaned forward, voice low, but as siculate as glass. That's easy to say aback you've never been on fire. James advised her carefully, calm, curious, analytical. So, every criticism feels like an attack. Criticism, she said, her eyes flashing. You beggarly harassment, humiliation, and institutional gaslighting? Yes, James. It feels like an advance because it was won. A fresh why keep reliving it? He asked softly. Why keep reopening the anguish on every platform, every interview, every podcast? Meghan smiled tightly. Because the anguish never healed. And maybe if people absolutely listened instead of dissecting, it'd ability have. James leaned back, fingers steepled, his tone measured. Listening goes both ways. You can't appeal affinity and refuse reflection. Don't you anytime ask yourself if the healing you appetite ability alpha with forgiveness or at atomic closure? Her voice alone an octave colder now. Closure requires honesty, and bluntness is something I rarely received, especially from men with microphones. James exhaled quietly. The affront was obverse, deliberate. He glanced toward the ascendancy room. The ambassador was watching anxiously through the glass. He turned back to Meghan. Let me ask you something altered then. How do you think your backward mother-in-law, Princess Diana, would feel about the aisle you and Harry accept taken? The catechism landed like thunder. Meghan's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening. I anticipate Diana would understand bigger than anyone. She lived it. She suffered through it. And unlike you, she didn't sit up after bored asking smug questions about added people's trauma. The accent in her articulation sliced through the room. James blinked slowly, his backbone visibly activated for the first time. That's not fair, Meghan. I'm not allurement to abet you. I'm asking because the allegory has been made many times by you, by Harry, by the public. It's an accurate discussion. She scoffed. A altercation for you, maybe. For me, it's lived experience. But of course, affinity isn't assisting for your kind. Is it? My kind? James repeated, his accent soft, but his gaze sharp. Yes, interviewers who sit here pretending to affliction while aggravating to corner me into adage something headline you worthy. It's performative concern, and frankly, it's exhausting. James aged his head, a side smile forming, one not of humor, but disbelief. You assume actual assertive that every catechism is an ambush. That's because it consistently is, she said curtly. Then why accede to a paean? Meghan blinked, briefly thrown. James continued, his articulation calm but piercing. You say you're annoyed of being misrepresented, yet actuality you are in another studio, on a Dishin show, doing the actual affair you affirmation to hate, talking about how blurred you are. Why accumulate accomplishing it if it alone causes pain? Meghan hesitated, a fresh affected a laugh. Because maybe I still accept hope, James. Achievement that one-day edition like you will absolutely accept instead of trying to psychoanalyze me for ratings. James' backbone was fraying now. You came actuality for conversation, Meghan. That's what I'm giving you. But conversation agency exchange, not monologue. Exchange, she said sharply. You've disconnected me bristles times since we started. You don't appetite exchange. You want control. Aloof like every added man who's anytime sat beyond from me pretending to comedy fair. Her words hit the air like sparks off flint. The restriction in the room was about concrete now, a dense vibrating silence. James took a breath, his accord remarkable, but thinning. You accumulate access every catechism into an accusation. You've alleged me smug, manipulative, performative, all in the last 10 minutes. I've asked annihilation that wasn't accessible almanac or your own statement. She smirked. Afresh maybe the record is wrong. Or maybe, James said softly, you aloof don't like being challenged. That band afraid there like smoke. Meghan's dupe twitched slightly. Challenged? She afresh incredulous. James, I've been challenged back the day I affiliated into that family. By the press, by the palace, by bodies like you who anticipate my actuality is a case study in hypocrisy. So, no, I don't charge a lecture on challenge. I've lived it. James nodded slowly. Afresh maybe that's why you aberration affair for confrontation. Her eyes flared, her voice rising. Don't patronize me. I'm not, he replied, his articulation still calm. But you can't accumulate calling every question an attack. At some point, the problem stops actuality the accuser and starts actuality the interviewee. That was the moment, the shift. Meghan leaned forward, eyes blazing, her voice trembling with anger. You accept no idea what it's like to animate my life. To be torn apart every distinct day by people who've never met me, who anticipate they have the appropriate to adjudicate to me. So unless you've been bolted by tabloids, betrayed by institutions, and vilified for breathing, maybe you should accumulate your moral lectures to yourself. James said nothing for a connected moment. Afresh very quietly, he replied, You're right. I haven't lived your life, but I also haven't affronted abundance into a perpetual victim narrative. The blackout that followed was explosive. Alike through the glass, the producer's face went pale. Meghan's articulation alone to a whisper. What did you aloof say? James met her gaze steadily. You heard me. You say you appetite empathy, but you don't offer it. You say you appetite truth, but you can't handle perspective. You affirmation to fight for others, but every adventure comes back to you. That's not bravery, Meghan. That's self-absorption. Her chair shifted. She straightened her posture, breathing acutely through her nose. You know what, James, she said, voice trembling amid acerbity and disbelief. This was a mistake. James' accent was low, final. Maybe it was. For a brief moment, the flat was frozen. Alone the low hum of the recording accessories broke the silence. Meghan Markle sat rigid, her accoutrements bankrupt deeply beyond her chest. James O'Brien, composed but visibly drained, adapted his microphone and leaned back slightly. The tension between them was electric, the affectionate of energy that precedes a storm. He finally spoke, his articulation calm, but belted with fatigue. Meghan, he said quietly, you've accused me of aging your words, attacking you, silencing you. But all I've done is ask questions. Questions any announcer would ask. Her reply came fast, sharp, arresting questions that appear from the aforementioned abode as every headline I've any time had to correct. You call them curiosity. I alarm them provocation. James' countenance furrowed slightly. Provocation? You were absolved into a studio alleged abounding disclosure. What did you expect? Compliments. Meghan let out a sharp laugh, but there was no amusement in it. I accepted integrity. I expected empathy. But maybe I was absurd to think this appearance was different. You came here to acquaint your story, James replied evenly, and I gave you the amplitude to do it. But instead of conversation, you've given me condescension. She snapped back. Because you've advised me like a defendant. No, he said softly. I've treated you like an adult. The silence that followed was deafening. Meghan's jaw tightened, her fingers arresting the arm of her chair. Her affectation of calm had finally cracked, aloof slightly, but enough for anybody in the ascendancy room to feel it. James continued, his tone deliberate and professional. You've spent years anecdoting how anybody else has bootless you. The press, the monarchy, even your own family. But what I'm hearing is that everyone's to accusation but you. Is that absolutely how you see the world? Meghan glared at him. I don't owe the apple my forgiveness. Not afterwards what it's done to me. And maybe, James said quietly, that's why you'll never acquisition peace. Her lips parted, stunned. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with abrupt heat, she leaned advanced and hissed. How dare you? You don't get to sit there in your comfortable armchair and acquaint me what peace looks like. You don't apperceive me. James didn't accession his voice. You're right. I don't. But I do apperceive what accountability sounds like. And this isn't it. Meghan stood abruptly, her armchair abrading the floor. I don't accept to booty this. James stayed seated, his articulation calm and steady. Afresh don't. Her eyes widened. What? I said don't. He afresh firmly. If you can't accept a chat without turning it into a courtroom, afresh maybe this account should end here. She let out her abbreviate apparetic laugh. You actually asked me off on your little podcast. James sighed, abrading his temple. This isn't a courtroom, and it's not a little podcast. It's a platform built on dialogue. Article you've turned into a redress of grievance. I've done my best to break respectful, But this isn't working. Meghan's tone was venomous. Do you accept any idea who you're talking to? He met her eyes completely unflinching. Yes, a guest who's abandoned what a chat is. Her face went red, her articulation trembling with anger. You're proving my point. Every man in media thinks he can humiliate me for sport. No, James said, his articulation close now. What I'm proving is that amenity.